So I've been scanning in all these I've been calling these huge thumbnails, scanning them in, shrinking them down, scaling them down to size. And I've been trying to clean a lot of that up. I think in hindsight, this is probably a little too big. I think tabloid size is so big that it just takes an enormous amount of effort to fill it all in and it gets sloppy. Just kind of working on figuring out how to fill in these drawings, clean up the edges, create like a space. And these aren't great, but I think they will suffice. I don't know if I'm gonna use any of these in the rule book or the scenario book, but at least now I have a little library of clip art that I can use. This lizard drawing that I was working on but decided not to use made me think about Island of the Lizard King. Island of the Lizard King was Fighting Fantasy book number 7. And I was actually just looking through this to see how they drew lizards, because I remembered some of the lizard drawings to be pretty cool. And it turns out I've never really given Alan Langford a deep dive, but after spending time with this book, I'm inspired and blown away by every single drawing. So then I was like, man, I wish that I could just get a book of art with like all the Fighting Fantasy art in it. And I realized there's that one book that came out, You Are the Hero, but that's more of like a history of Fighting Fantasy. What I'd love to have is just like an art folio. So I decided to make my own art folio of Alan Langford's Fighting Fantasy work. But this is just a book of illustrations by Alan Langford. So I actually scanned them in at 600 dpi, pretty high resolution, so that I could scale them up a little bit without blowing out the detail. But this really gives me an idea of just how many lines it takes to make a drawing that looks this detailed. And now I have this, basically this kind of encyclopedia. How do you portray light coming through a stone chamber? Ocean waves, just using black and white. Hatching and cross-hatching and rock textures, heads of various types and hands and feet, and then specific textures like lizard scales and like this kind of rim lighting on the top of the lizard heads here really makes these things more volumetric. This outline, this contour is sort of broken a little bit, you know, because there's light pouring over this top edge. This line should be thin. It should even possibly be broken. Skeletal forms, fur, the human form here, this female form, there's not too much hatching. There's not too much texture. It really reads as like smoother female flesh. Hands hold on to sticks. This is all stuff that I sort of have like a handle on, but not really. And now I have this single resource that I can look at. Every time I look at an artist that I'm really blown away by, and I take the time to stop and analyze exactly what they're doing and how they're doing it, I feel like I level up a little bit with my illustration skills. So I just kind of chalked this up to a half a day of research and development just to try to become a better illustrator, a better inker. At some point, I'll probably build another folio of Ian McCaig's work. He illustrated Death Trap Dungeon, but I don't want to get too sidetracked, so I'm not going to do that now. Today, I'm doing a long overdue update to the hero cards, the stat trackers, and the player aids. When I print out these cards, I always print them on Strathmore Bristol, and I always do trim marks on one side and no trim marks on the back side. So that way, if they're not registered perfectly, you're not going to see trim marks. Now I have updated hero cards. All the stats are completely updated. When the hero levels up, the abilities increase, the vital stats increase a little bit. Sometimes there's a change to the special abilities. This is the old cleric. I didn't hate this, but she always kind of bothered me a little bit. I don't know, she looked like a 12-year-old Sinead O'Connor. which in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. But I kind of wanted my cleric to be a little less burlap sacky. I kind of wanted to accentuate the female form without going overboard. So I feel like I found kind of a nice balance. And I feel like the cleric should wear white, not black. And then we're basically just repeating the same process for the stat trackers. So this is the old stat tracker, and it had 16 slots. And the biggest problem with it was when you loaded it up with chits, you couldn't read the numbers. A lot of the slots would be full, and it would just be really hard to manage chits. And I also didn't think that there needed to be 16 slots. Most of the action happened in the 12 slots. I refactored the game a little bit, eliminated 13 through 16. And now when you load the stat tracker up with chits, you can still see the values. And so that's super handy. And also, the ingredients no longer have values. There's only one unit per ingredient. So the ingredients will actually just stack on the one slot. And when you use it, it's used. So that's a huge change to the way ingredients work and the way potions are made. It eliminates unnecessary crunch. It makes the game a little easier to play, but it doesn't take away from the basic joy of crafting. So I think it's kind of a win-win. I've been working on new monster chit design. The old monster chits were designed to be used as standees. So they had the full body of the monster, but at that scale, the 3/4 inch chit scale, actually kind of hard to read. I got rid of the standees. And so I decided to redesign the monster chits to be more like portraits. I've been sharing the new design for feedback, and so far the feedback's been very mixed. This is the old set, and this is the new set that I'm trying out. The old one, kind of a full silhouette of the cultist. The new one kind of has a headshot, but there's room for the title, and all the monsters are kind of like that now. You got the old zombie, the new zombie, the old skeleton warrior, the new skeleton warrior. I guess I'm curious, what do you think? Do you like the old version better, or do you like this new portrait version better? There's no right or wrong answer. I really just want to know. Or is there maybe some middle ground, some hybrid? Obviously, I need to see what these look like in play, because that's a whole other metric to use. This is your chance to weigh in. Let me know what you think. And then I've been revamping the player aids. This is the old player aid for turn actions. There's 4 turn actions: move, cast a spell, concoct, and craft trap. And then under move, there's all these free actions. Smash can happen at the beginning or end of the move, so you can bash a door down and then walk through it, or end your turn at a door and kick it down. You can even manage gear while you're moving. That used to require an entire turn to manage gear, but I mean, I've been hiking, trekking, mountain climbing for years. I do an enormous amount of managing gear while I'm on the move. In fact, I rarely stop to manage gear. So, you know, I think equipping a weapon, stowing a weapon, managing gear for the most part should be able to happen during the course of the move. It's all kind of abstracted anyway. It's not a simulation, and it's way more fun to be able to do a bunch of stuff, which is kind of where I landed. It's kind of where everyone else landed. And I'm about a month into the Dungeon 23 side project. I'm just trying to figure out what the constraints for this project are. The most important thing is spend less than 10 minutes a day on it. This is really just a side process, and it's just a way for me to unwind and scratch that prototyping itch while I continue to work on actual products. I'm pretty happy with the size of these chits and the amount of detail I can fit on them. I want them to be extremely simple, but I also like the idea of having a tiny little grid on these 1-inch chits. I want to go with a simple chit pull system for exploration where all of these are just in a bowl. Stairs, doors, debris, gaps, alcoves, secret doors. I basically want all the tropes. I mean, for all practical purposes, this is sort of my take on Citadel of Blood and kind of an old school, early 80s chit pole dungeon crawl game. I'm still playing around with the idea that like there are lit spaces and unlit spaces, and that'll dictate whether you have to burn torch, that kind of thing. I could make these encounters card-based, and I'll think about that, but it could really just be lookup tables in a rule book, or it could be cards, decks of cards. There will probably be dice or half-inch chits that will be used to track the location of the adventure party and the monsters. But there's nothing revolutionary about this game. This really is just kind of a sandbox, a very lighthearted, casual sandbox that I can play in while I'm doing a lot of heavier lifting on bigger, more serious projects. I finally finished reading the Moldvay BX version of D&D from 1981, and really like these older versions of D&D, especially the Moldvay version. After that, I went back and tried to read older versions, like basically the original D&D from the mid-70s. And I think this is about as far back as I want to go with D&D. The rule sets that I've read that come before Moldvay are pretty rough. A lot of people online have said, and I tend to agree with it, this Moldvay version is really when D&D kind of came into its own, and I sort of agree with that based on my reading. I've also been trying out some other OSR, and I actually kind of like this white box interpretation of the old D&D white box, I guess. And I think this is nicely produced. I think the art is decent, and I thoroughly enjoy this book. The rules are fairly simple. It has a lot of optional rules. It includes ascending and descending armor class. I personally don't have any problem with THAC0 and descending armor class. Each class has just a single saving throw value and maybe some bonuses for certain types of saving throws, but there's just some nice simplifications to the rules here that I appreciate. So I don't know, between like Moldvay and some of these OSR books, I kind of like both. I like the new, more modern, simplified, streamlined approach that some of these OSR games are taking. But I do love the nostalgia factor of this. I've also read like old school sigils. I think I prefer white box. I don't know why. It's just for some reason this speaks to me a little more. Thief just has one special skill. It's called Thievery. Any of the old thief skills from Moldvay have been combined into a single skill here, and it's a single 1d6 roll. And I sort of like those simplifications. I'm not sure that I want like a whole plethora of skill checks with percentile dice. It's a little clunky and crunchy. The character classes here go up to about level 10, and at level 10, like, you know, knights can build strongholds and wizards can build towers. And yeah, I like the simplicity of level 1 through 10. So I think I like almost everything about how they streamlined D&D. All right, so what's left to ship the public beta of my Dungeon Crawl board game? I need to make a final call on Monster Chits. The other chits are pretty much fine. I don't have any plans to do any major revisions to the other game chits. I need to do monster card backs. These monster cards are way out of date, but I'm waiting till I finish the monster card backs before I print out a new version of the monster cards. And I've been putting off monster card backs for a long time because I couldn't decide exactly what I wanted to do with the backs of these cards. And now I think I've decided that it's going to be monster information. So I kind of want every single monster card to be completely self-contained. I want the back of the card to explain everything in detail, basically like an FAQ. But I'm hoping to finish that tomorrow, and then monsters will be done. I have to finish updating the map tiles. Temple tiles are completely updated, ready to go, ready to ship. I have to do some minor updates to the other 3 tile sets. Not major updates, but I just need to update the iconography on them. And that's gonna take a solid day or 2. But hopefully by the end of the week, I'll have these done. And I just need to do a single read through for spelling, punctuation, grammar, italicized, bold, that kind of thing. And just do some really fine tuning with the copy editing. And then I'm gonna post this one more time for feedback and get some feedback on the adventure rules. I'm hoping to get both these books completely done by the end of the month, so like in a week. And then I really just have to spend a little more time on packaging. This is completely out of date now, so this is all gonna go away. The game's probably gonna have a different name. I'm still working out some ideas for the game name. This is definitely gonna be different art, but this is still the size of the box. Basically 4.5 by 8 by like 1.5 inches. And finally, since this is the most scattershot video I've ever shot, I figured I would include even more random, potentially useless information, but I've been looking at some Druillet. I got this book recently. I'm a big fan of the old French sci-fi artists from the 70s, and you know, talk about cool, expressionistic, 2-bit line work. I just love how much emotion all this stuff has. This stuff's pretty crazy. Fuels the imagination. And does a really good job of implying light and texture with minimal line work. I find his stuff almost unreadable, but to me, it's not really about conventional storytelling. It's about world building and creating a mood, creating a space, creating a sandbox. I think Druillet was really just building sandboxes for himself.